Welcome to Portrait of an Editor. I am Francis Lombard. On this episode, Alex Antone and I discuss the freedom that comes with editing second-tier series, his work on the Arrowverse line of comics, his mentors Mark Chiarello and Ben Abernathy, and the difference in editing a DC comic versus an Image comic. Also, we dig into what makes a Skybound comic and how Alex went about launching Skybound Comet for the YA market. Finally, he passes along the best way to fix a cover. A reminder, please check out the Portrait of an Editor Patreon page. You can find the earlier interviews all the way back from 2017, and it's just $1 a month to join. Now here's my conversation with Alex. Enjoy. Alex, welcome to Portrait of an Editor. Seeing we were talking for the last 15 minutes before we started recording about sort of teams and everything and rivalries, especially between the Chargers and the Patriots, and how some of those playoff games were really good and really nasty back in the aughts.
Yeah, mostly really bad for me, yes.
But you worked at DC, and it just popped into my head as we were just getting into it of how do I start this? And I'm like, was there any of that sort of back and forth that we used to have, that Stan Lee and DC had back, when he was there, and even up into the 90s? And I know it got a little heated, when Joe Quesada and Bill Jemas took over, to the point where I don't think anybody was talking to each other at one point. But was there sort of, a back and forth and sort of a nice little sort of challenging of
rivalry
rivalry,
Marvel and DC.
Yeah, that sort of kept the blood flowing a little, or is those...
I think so. I mean, I think when I can't speak for Marvel. Obviously, I never worked at Marvel, but I could say, and I've definitely witnessed things that make me think, yeah, they're definitely aware of what DC is doing, and purposely try to mess with DC sometimes. But yeah, I think especially during the time that I was at DC, there was a very clear sort of, we need to, Marvel's sort of the benchmark, and we need to hit or exceed where Marvel is, or try to. I think we really only considered Marvel to be our competitor. We didn't really consider indie comics as a competitor. It seemed like, I'm sure that was true. Obviously, we were battling for talent and all that, but yeah, definitely. I mean, DC Entertainment was formed as a result of Marvel being bought by Disney. So there's obviously an awareness between the two entities of what the other is doing, and always trying to one up each other, and steal talent from the other side. And when I was at DC, they brought Bendis over, which was considered at the time to be a big deal. So yeah, there's definitely a lot between the two companies that drives things.
How did it affect? I mean, how did you look upon it when you're, showing up day to day, or the long-term planning you had as an editor of what can I do to really show up Marvel?
Yeah, I mean, I never thought of it like that. But it was, for me, it was how do I make sure that my books are good, and how do I get them to sell as many copies as possible? Those were kind of the two key things that I would think about. And because I was never editing Batman, I was editing maybe, I guess, second tier sort of titles, for the most part, like Teen Titans, and which I considered a first tier title, but the sales didn't necessarily reflect that. So I was more fighting for visibility within DC, and just saying I want to make sure that my books feel important, when Batman sort of always is going to feel important. That's just, especially as long as they're doing a good job, that Batman's always going to feel like the book at DC. Certainly has in recent years. So for me, I was always okay, how do I get people to notice? How do I get people to care? That was the constant struggle. And it's just looking at the numbers every month and fighting gravity, which is what it felt like. Things always go down. That's just the way it goes. It's the nature of the business. So how do you get things to level out? How do you, especially once it's going? That's why it's the key, at least I've found, with editing monthly comics, is just starting as strong as possible, because everything kind of goes from there. There's examples of books that start medium or start low and then catch fire, but those are really rare examples. Most of the time, it's however strong you start is directly indicative of kind of where things go.
The high point.
From a sales standpoint.
But the thing is, the great thing about a second tier book, and those are the books that usually could start weak and then really take off because of whatever is being done. I mean, did you ever think about that of like, how can I, you're steering the books. I mean, let me make sure I'm not wrong, but at a DC, you're overseeing, you're shepherding the books, you're shepherding those characters a little more than the creative team is, really, because your creative team could come in and out. Or what was your sort of share of being responsible for the direction of the series?
I mean, how it should work usually is that you hire a team because you like what they do, right? You like either the artist or the writer, or you like the team together. Sometimes they're the same person. And if I have to make the distinction that this is specifically at like a DC where you're in charge of specific titles versus what I do now, which is more like creator-driven original things. But I mean, you have a general idea of what you want, or you have an idea of what you think a good Teen Titans book looks like, or what you'd like to see a Teen Titans book look like, and then you bring in somebody to give you that thing. And there's a process of getting to know each other and building trust and all of that. That's always very, very touch and go at first, especially with somebody that you've never worked with before. But but I never thought of it as like me dictating the story or anything like that. I really did try to let the talent lead. That's their job. My job is more just to make sure that things stay on the rails. I'm there as like a sound, we can get into the many jobs of an editor, but like I'm there sort of as a sounding board. I'm there as a when you're bowling, you get those bumpers that come up and prevent you from going into the gutter. Like that's kind of me. I'm just like, hey, let's keep it going this direction. Just kind of be both like a cheerleader and a teacher, and making sure that like it's all going in a direction that makes sense for the story, but also for the company as a whole. You have to be, especially in like a shared universe situation, you have to be aware of what's happening in the other books, so that like, hey, I want to kill this character in this book. Oh no, actually they're popping up, 2 months from now in this other book, so that's not going to fly. So there's a lot of that, but yeah, I mean, I really always viewed the creators that I work with as sort of like partners. Like we're kind of all in the trenches together, figuring it out.
Do you encourage them to take risk because they were, if they were in a second tier book, like you were talking about, the sort of really take the risk?
Plane going overhead right now. I don't know if you can hear that. You say, do I encourage them to take risks?
Yeah, especially with the position that you were in, as you were saying, that you're not on a Batman book. You're not under the, this microscope at times of Batman. Teen Titans is an important book, and the characters definitely resonate with a lot of people beyond the comics too.
Yeah.
But I mean, or any other things that you were writing that you could be take a little more risk in character development, because maybe these characters weren't being pulled into other, parts of the shared universe.
Yeah.
Just to create as an editor, how did you create an environment of like, okay, guys, we're not going to be matching Batman numbers, but let's have fun and see, where the chemistry takes the series and the creators and what kind of ride we can have.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely encourage risk taking. I definitely encourage creating new things. I think that it's challenging now. The marketplace is so fickle, especially nowadays when you're doing regular sort of periodical DC monthly comics. There's a certain thing that I think retailers respond to or fans respond to, which is a lot of like familiarity. I always felt like they responded to, they wanted the familiar, but they wanted it presented in a new way. They knew where it was going, but they wanted us, they obviously still want to be surprised. I liked doing things that seemed kind of crazy and then maybe we're actually less crazy, but I was never afraid of like stoking some sort of fan response or outrage, given the fact that I knew where we were actually headed with things, or we had a good reason for doing things. But I don't see that quite as much anymore, because I think people just, I don't know, I feel like it feels like when I was getting into comics in the mid 2000s, I saw a lot of publishers doing more interesting and riskier things with the characters that that upset people, but they were never really worried about upsetting people because it seemed like they always were like, no, we're going to stay the course. I think Twitter wasn't as loud, at that point. And so it's just been interesting to watch the evolution of like, how do you engage with the fans? How do you take into account what the fans want, but also give them something that's new and interesting that might, ultimately everyone's showing up to be entertained and taking on. They love the DC characters and they want, to be taking on a story, a familiar ride. But so taking risks and taking things in new directions and doing things with the characters that have never been done before is always inherently risky. But I just feel like if you don't do that, then you're going to end up with a pretty boring book that everyone kind of just feels forgettable. So like we did a lot of things with Teen Titans that like some things worked, some things didn't work. We created characters, some stuck, some didn't stick. And that was definitely part of the fun. And sales maintained a high enough number that like it was considered a successful book. I'm sure we would have liked to have sold more, but it maintained for a long time. I think they ended the Teen Titans run that I was on now at this point and started like Teen Titans Academy or something like that. But yeah. I mean, I definitely encourage risk taking. I definitely encourage people to do different things, create new characters, but don't. There's still sort of some basic principles. This is going back to being an editor. Like you have to kind of know what the audience expects so that you can give them what they expect, but in a different way or a new way or a surprising way. And I think that's where the magic is. There's no real like formula to that. It's just sort of, what does this feel right? Does this feel like a book that people want to read? Does this feel like a premise that will get people excited, get retailers excited? That's the other thing is you're not just considering the fans when you're doing the book, you're considering like, what do the retailers respond to? Because they're ultimately like hand selling these books to fans, which is great. Yeah. So.
It's weird because they're fans themselves usually.
Sure.
And they're the fans.
And they're the most jaded fans because they've been doing it forever, right? Just like me as an editor, like 10 years in, or other editors have been doing it way longer. Like you get to a point where nothing is surprising. Everything feels like a rehash,
Or I find out when's the last time you actually read a comic book even though you're a comic book editor.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's been actually really fun since I left DC to go back and read DC for fun, because when you're there reading DC comics, at least for me, like I did it, but it always felt like work, and so now reading the current Batman run or reading I like the book Robin right now at DC is like one of my favorite books, and reading that book is just like, oh, I'm just having a nice time reading about this character that I worked on for so long that like, oh, okay, no, I'm on board with all these things. This is cool, especially when they do a good job, which they are. So
now, did handling talent and sort of bringing, because of the unique aspect of a shared universe in DC Comics was the time you started, like in 2012, you started at DC as a digital new talent administrator.
Yeah.
What exactly is that?
I mean, I didn't know when I started. So it was, I did the interview Ben Abernathy was the guy that hired me.
Okay.
He was my internship supervisor back at Wildstorm, which is where I had my first foray in comics, learned what a comic book editor was, learned I wanted to be a comic editor, because who knows what a comic book editor actually is. But learning like, oh, this seems like a cool job. This seems like a job that I could do. It takes advantage of all the skill set that I have. When I graduated from college, there weren't any jobs available that were a fit. So I left did the game industry for a while, for 2-3 years, doing sort of adjacent responsibilities as like a producer and as like assistant producer and stuff like that. But yeah, then in 2012, this job got posted. I think I was kind of like ready to move on from my current job, and I reached out, and there was this job posting called New Talent Administrator. So I had a conversation I remember very vividly, and sitting in my car having a conversation with Ben, going, "What is this job?" And he goes, "Well, it's basically like an associate editor with the additional responsibilities of like going to conventions and meeting talent and working with like Mark Chiarella at the time, who was the kind of the head of any kind of scouting that was happening at DC and running the DC artist submissions stuff at Portfolio Reviews. And I was like, well, that sounds cool. That sounds like the best version of that job, because a lot of times when you're a younger editor, you don't actually get sent to conventions and stuff like that. So it's like, well, this seems like a great scenario. Like the actual new talent administrating part of it, I would say that position was not set up for success, because as a new guy coming in and going like, hey, what about this artist? What about this artist? What about this guy? Editors kind of like to find people themselves, and they also have their own sort of bullpen of people that they go to. And so I would say like really all I did was build up my own roster of talent for, you know, my own books, which was great. So, but like I remember suggesting people at the time, and editors would kind of just like, okay, you know, I think editors are just so overworked in general that, you know, it's tough to present information unless there's a specific purpose, or like, hey, are you hiring for this book specifically? Here's a person to do this specific thing. If you present them like, hey, generally speaking, I like this artist, what do you think? It's kind of like, okay, yeah, they're cool. And that's kind of where the conversation
that's
stops.
the end of it. Yeah, exactly.
So I got to learn. I got to go to a bunch of conventions with Mark Chiarella, which is really fun. But pretty soon, I think I was only in that role for like maybe a year, maybe less than a year, and then they, as is what happens at DC, like every 18 months they restructure everything. So at that point, I was just. They were like, you're an associate editor. That's your job. Like, okay, that's fine. That's what I wanted to do anyway. So, and then pretty soon after that, I was promoted because Ben had left, and there was opportunity to just do more, and I was doing more, and I was lucky to be in a situation where the timing worked out for me to get promoted. But yeah, it was a weird start for sure.
Any long
I was
time
doing digital books exclusively.
Yeah,
not
you were doing,
but for the most part.
Injustice or something. I think I read some of those a while back.
I didn't do Injustice. I did Adventures of Superman. I did Batman Beyond, Justice League Beyond. Basically, the Beyond universe at the time was all digital. I inherited that from Ben and relaunched it, and that was really fun. That was sort of the first ongoing thing that I worked on. And then, like all the TV show tie-in comics I was doing. So that was kind of cool because I got to meet a lot of the actors and, work with the people that were working on Arrow and Flash and those shows as they were. And that was the very beginning of the sort of that universe of characters. So it was fun to see the writer's room and see all that stuff. Get contracts signed by getting in my car and driving over to Glendale, going to the writer's room and literally handing them and saying, please sign this so we can pay you. It was, I mean, speaking of like things that are sort of under the radar, all the books that I worked on there, especially because we were a digital group within a larger sort of DC, and DC at the time, the main DC universe and Vertigo and everything was all East Coast still. So we were a really small, scrappy group that were doing a lot of work, but we were also, I think, largely left alone to do our thing. And so it was really fun. I really valued the books that I worked on at that time because it was a really great time to really learn and just have fun and do cool books. And the stakes weren't very high. And then those are always the books I had more fun with, were the books that were a little bit different, a little bit weird, or like anthologies where you could work with new talent and really just go through people and see what works and what doesn't work. And those are the things that I always felt like I had the most fun with, because it was just, let's just see if it works. And if it doesn't, there's no problems. It's all good.
Did you ever have to deal with any kind of licensing? Because I know the Batman Beyond was, Warner Brothers Animation, and of course the Arrowverse is, there's a CW or whatever. But you also have live actors who have contracts too. So did you have to juggle some of that licensing, and was that a learning?
Yeah, it was. We did full on licensed comics as well, but there was a weird sort of middle ground on the things were also owned by Warner Brothers. and were DC characters. So it was an interesting situation. We were never usually allowed to use actor likenesses because
Oh, really?
I think like we could use, sometimes they allowed us to use like photo covers and things like that to promote the books. Like I remember the Flash season 0 trade paperback had, Grant Gustin's face on it. And I remember Phil Hester being like, all my books should have Grant Gustin's face on them as the cover because this thing sold really well. We always called it like evocative of so-and-so. And so it was never supposed to be exact. And so I think that's kind of how we got away with not going through a really crazy approval process. Plus I was literally working with the writers of the show that were also the executive producers of the show. And so, like Mark Guggenheim, like made it really easy.
Yeah.
So that, like, if it was good with him, it was good.
It helps when somebody's also got comic book experience too.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. And that was actually good because there was a lot of writers that didn't have comic book experience, like the TV show writers that were like, "Hey, you get an issue of this comic to write," and so. Especially early on in my career, working with people that had never written comics before and having to kind of explain how to do it, I think was really good for me to kind of articulate early on and just think about it myself. Because like, there's no training for comic book editing, like in the formal sense. There's no school you can go to where you learn how to be a comic book editor. It's all sort of on the job training, and it really comes down to like who you learn from directly. Like that's why I was really thankful to have Ben as my internship supervisor, and then later as my boss again, like teaching me things and working with him. I was in an interesting situation though, because I was never an assistant editor. So I was never actually assisting anybody, but I would just sort of learn by talking and asking questions. And that's something I think that is one of my strengths, is just like, I'm not afraid to ask a question and be like, I don't understand this. Can you explain this? Or help me get to, where you are in this. So it was definitely, getting thrown into the fire and figuring it out. I definitely made a lot of mistakes, and it's continue to make mistakes to this day. But it's a weird job because there's no formal process.
But in filmmaking, one thing I picked up, like in filmmaking, Conrad Hall, who is an amazing cinematographer, he did Searching for Bobby Fischer was one of the last movies, but he's, if I look up Conrad Hall, and you'll see all the amazing movies that he did. He had this thing about finding, having a creative mistake, that sometimes the mistake takes you down a path that allows you to find something and do something or whatever, or get a point of view that actually leads to something better.
Yeah.
That he would seem to want an environment around where mistakes or different point of things forced him to get out of his sort of security, comfort zone.
Yeah.
And you're new, and you also with digital in the aughts was just beginning to come up, and no one really knew where it was going. And then the universes that you're in and everything, and the CW universe is just beginning, and stuff like that. It just seemed sort of a perfect environment to ask questions and also not be sort of. But you were also, it sounds like you were forced to sort of really look at the art form a little, to have answers for the writers and go, no, it's not a guy who can walk across the floor. You can't just write that and have them shoot it. You also, you have to write, how does he get to the door? Or is it 1 panel, 2 panels, 3 panels and stuff like that? Yeah. Did the job sort of really force you to break down the medium and how it communicates and tells stories at times?
Definitely. Especially with new people, new writers specifically. That sort of became my thing for a while. As I was working with a lot of writers that were like first-time comic book writers, and so being able to break down why something works or why something doesn't work, articulate, all that. It was truly education for everyone involved, because I was forced to. A lot of it was innate. I was obviously a comic book reader. I think I'm good at observing. I'm good at sort of breaking things down. I'm a good problem solver. So but actually being forced to articulate all of that for somebody that was trying to do a job was great. It was great timing. I was really, really happy that I came in and got to do the things that I did, because it was all like you said, even the mistakes, like it was all meaningful, it gave me a really, really good foundation very quickly. And I could, I was also using project management skills and coming over from video games where things are, there's just a lot more variables. Like that was helpful experience as well to bring in. But I'm really, really thankful that I got to work with the people that I got to work with and work on the books that I got to work with, because it was a great education.
Well, that was another thing I was going to say is that Mark Chiarello, people who longtime listeners know that he sort of is responsible for this podcast in a roundabout way. Ben, I knew back in the aughts at one point when I was at Humanoids. I mean, to be under their tutelage, you can't go wrong. I mean,
no, it was great, for sure. No, Mark, and like I don't even think Mark thinks about himself as anyone that influenced me at all, but like I definitely was influenced by him, and just talking with him, even just the casual conversations that we would have, like waiting in line for coffee at a convention. Like I remember those conversations. I bet he doesn't, but I remember those conversations, and the fact that he also showed so much confidence in me so quickly really gave me confidence. So that was really, like, I really did, especially those two specific people, Ben and Mark, like I always felt very supported and believed in by those two people. And I respected them so much that I was like, okay, well, I must have some potential here if they think I can do it. So
did you come from an art background, or did you have to learn the art background?
Had to completely learn. I mean, I grew up like everybody reading like How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, and like so I read all of those books. And honestly, that's probably where a lot of my knowledge comes from, is just like reading those kinds of art books and story, books. And like I remember the Wizard one was really good. That was like kind of broke down some of the main features in Wizard magazine over the years. So
there's Mark's book, Coloring for Comics, DC, and the lettering.
Framed Ink, I think, is another one that I read that was really good. Like, that was also one of the things I probably bugged Mark about really early on. Was like, what more books should I read? What else should I look at? But no, I was English. So I went to college at University of San Diego. I did my internship, which was honestly my real education in comics. But I was a business administration major because I was too chicken to be an English major. And I was an English minor, and all of my English classes were my favorite classes, and I tolerated the business classes, but I was like, I think having some business background is probably not a bad idea in case, this other stuff. And at that point, I was pretty early on in college being like, I want to be a comic book editor. So, which is pretty rare, but, I knew like, hey, there's like 10 comic book editors. So I should probably just play the odds a little bit here and maybe get a business degree and maybe consider other things in entertainment. And that was obviously how I ended up with video games. But, I for one of my business classes though, I remember I created a comic book company as a final project. Was like, here's the like signature character. This is how great this company was. The signature character was called Exact Change Man, and his superpower was he always had exact change, which maybe is a dated reference now because nobody uses cash. But yeah, that was. So we had to, come up with the business side of this comic book company and how many titles we were going to do, and come up with. We did a lot of spreadsheets, which has continued into my current career of doing a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of P&Ls and things like that. So like having the business background is absolutely useful, and wasn't. It was something that I think a lot of other editors maybe didn't have. So what I lacked in actual I didn't go to film school. I didn't go to. Anything like that. So it was, I was learning sort of the arts side of things, but the business and planning and strategy stuff I had figured out.
There is a bunch of stuff for editors. I mean, I don't know what you had to do. You probably have to, with Skybound, so we'll move up into the future. I mean, the present a little more. Are you as a senior editor, are you coming up with budgets for your books? Even at DC, did you have to budget your books at times?
So it was
And
the strangest thing. Yeah, sorry. I thought you were done.
no. But I mean, there's a business part that we really don't talk about here.
Yeah.
But I mean, I did it a lot when I was when I was Humanoids. I learned how to do it. And then I went to the film school route too. But I was at a producing track, so there was a lot of business aspect of learning how to how are we going to pay for this? How are we going to get this up and running? And that's the business part.
So at DC at first, when I was in the digital group, I definitely had budgets for all of my books.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say it was like full on doing the P&L sheets and really like getting in there, but I was, I also did like custom comics and things where like companies would pay us to do comics for them. And so I'd keep a budget there. I was definitely very budget conscious. Like I was working in Hank Canalta's group, and I love Hank. Hank is one of the first, he's the guy that basically said, hey, yeah, we could maybe do intern stuff at Wildstorm. So he was great. I love Hank. But he was also very much like, I want you guys to understand the business. I want you guys to consider how much money you're spending because it's important. And so I definitely kept budgets for all of those books. But then when I started doing DC Universe stuff, it was weird because that all went away. And like, I would only be told that I spent too much money on something after it was done. And somebody would come to me and go, hey, you really killed your budget with this hire. And I was like, well, I didn't have a budget, so I don't know what you mean. So yeah. I think that's changed now. But
okay.
I think that it was weird. It was weird how they, at the time, little we talked about how much money we were spending on things because it felt like this is important. And so it was like completely focused on the creative and the books and keeping things on schedule and keeping the machine going versus really thinking more broadly about kind of the decisions that were getting made, which is one of the reasons I wanted to explore a different thing, because I actually enjoy thinking about everything. I enjoy having to think about the business side because I want to know why we're making all the decisions that we're making. And at Skybound, I am in charge of all my P&Ls. Like, obviously, I work with a lot of really smart people that help make decisions, but like, I have to come up with the budget. It's a really lean team at Skybound in the best possible way, and I think it's a perfect fit for me and what I'm looking for. But it's totally different in that you are totally responsible for everything at Skybound, like from top to bottom. Versus at DC, it was like, stay in your lane, do your thing. Other people will worry about the money. Other people worry about this and that. And it's just a different thing, because obviously DC has to put out a certain number of books every month. They've got, it's a large company, and it's just a completely different way of making comics, as I found out.
So one of the main reason why we're talking is because on Twitter you retweeted something. What are comic book editors actually? And project managers, administrator, marketer, teacher, talent scout, leader, scripts editor, team builder, art director, proofreader, copy editor, cheerleader, counselor, mentor, sounding board, friend, and problem solver.
Never friend. Never friend. No.
Yes, I think that. But so, what is, as a senior editor at Skybound? I mean, are you hitting all those? What is your sort of what does a senior
and more like
what else is there? Babysitter? I don't know.
I mean,
cruise director.
The financing side of it could be another sort of Venn diagram, but I mean, I think it all comes. I was thinking about that today. Like, how do you boil it all down? And I really think that I don't know if problem solver is on there, but that's kind of what it is. Like, you could kind of boil it all down to problem solver. And I think that is something that I've always been good at. And I think all the best editors that I've worked with have been fantastic problem solvers, and always, they maybe don't have all the answers, but they know how to ask the right questions, and they know how to get to a place that everybody is ultimately satisfied with. I think whether, and every every book is going to be different. Every creator is going to be different. You can't, I think that was one of the mistakes I made early on in my career, was taking sort of a one size fits all approach to creators and being like, well, I'm just going to treat everybody the same and it's all fair. And I just want to be fair to everybody. And like, obviously I want to be fair to everybody, but I think that looks different for every person. So I think giving people, and as I'm talking about people, like giving, everybody has a problem or has something that they need, and being able to find the right fit for that problem in terms of story, creators, time, budget, everything from top to bottom is unique. And so being able to treat everybody differently, I think, is really an important part of any editor's maturation, is understanding like, yeah, it's not a one size fits all thing. You can't solve every problem the same. Every book is going to have different, is going to need a different touch. Every creator is going to need a different touch. Some creators respond well to some types of feedback, other creators don't. And so it's learning and understanding people and dealing with, it's a lot of soft skills, honestly, which sounds very businessy, but it's a lot of sort of soft skills and just learning how to talk to people, to interact with people, and make them feel heard. I think that's the ultimate thing, is like everybody in the process of making a piece of art wants to feel like their voice is being heard and that they matter, especially at a Marvel or DC where, it's just you are in the machine. And sometimes it's very easy to feel like your voice doesn't really matter. But finding a way to bring enthusiasm, bring kindness, but also, professionalism, and making sure that, things get done. It's a tough balance, but that is definitely, to me, I think the job beyond like notes, beyond budgeting, like the job is just like handling everybody sort of differently and giving them what they need so that we could get to the end goal of having a good comic that everybody's proud of. That's really what I think editing is.
Okay, that's it. No,
let's go home.
It's a great answer. How do you break that down? Or it's really, I mean, I think the best way to say it, and maybe this is something I've been trying to get with other conversations, it's an instinct. It's being able to know yourself and know other people, and be able to understand, be able to listen to people, but also you probably feel you've gotten better as you've gotten older in this job.
Yeah.
And just realizing situations and realizing the personalities, because you're just balancing personalities. You're dealing with personalities in one way or another, and able to read people either quickly, slowly, but able to engage with them in a way that is productive for everybody and positive, I guess. If you're delivering bad news to somebody, how do you start a conversation to sort of keep them on the team or whatever? You don't want to, you're not firing somebody, but like, I have to disappoint you today. How do you approach that?
Yeah, no, for sure. And that is a thing that you learn, and you're not going to be good at it first. I would say in general, like there was, times where I've delivered news, it's gone over terribly, and times that I've delivered news and I remember one guy, I think I even had to let go of this inker because of, it doesn't really matter why, but I walking away from the conversation, the inker was like, "Thank you so much, Alex. Like, I really kind of come away feeling like better than I was before." And I'm like, I don't know how this happened, but I need to do whatever I just did with everybody, because this is crazy. But no, for sure, I think it's an art, it's a soft skill. If I wanted to break it down into some components, I think it kind of depends on the situation. Like if I actually am firing somebody because they didn't hit a deadline, or it's just time, or the book isn't selling or whatever, I'm just really straight with them. I don't beat around the bush. I also don't want to waste their time. I don't want them. I actually learned about this. Speaking of sports, we were talking about sports earlier. I learned about this from watching like the football documentaries on HBO where they had to cut players. And like, I just was always shocked that it wasn't really a conversation so much. It's just like, okay, hey, here's the deal. Like, you're getting cut. I think you're great, but you're getting cut. Really sorry it didn't work out. Obviously if you have any questions, let me know. You can talk to so-and-so in the training room or whatever. But it was very much like, don't beat around the bush. Don't waste their time. Don't give them BS. Just be straight with them. So in an instance where I'm canceling a book or I'm firing somebody or whatever, I really try to come at it from a place of empathy. Obviously, like This is a big deal, but I don't belabor the issue because nobody wants me to be. They want to know why I've called them. That's the other thing is like, usually I will send an email first and be like, hey, do you have time to hop on the phone? I don't want to leave them in suspense, but I do like to try to have hard conversations over the phone or in person.
Yeah.
And so that's definitely something that's really important to me is like just treating everybody like human beings, just trying to do a job. Like that's what we're all doing at the end of the day. So being straight with them, but then like, okay, so that's an extreme example of like, I actually have to fire somebody. But if it's like, hey, I think you need to do a better job on this or that. It kind of depends on the person, but generally speaking, I try to. A lot of editors do this thing where it's called like a compliment sandwich, where you start with like
a positive
thing, and then like work into like the real reason why you're talking, kind of in the middle, and then you end it with like a nice positive thing and a word of encouragement and all that. And I think usually that works because I think people, people respond to being praised better than they respond to criticism. But that's. I definitely have used that. And I just think generally being encouraging, that's like why it's so important that the talent that you hire understands that you hired them because you like them and you like what they do and they know that you believe they can do it. And I think, at DC, there were times when you didn't you didn't actually hire the person. Like it was just sort of you're handed a team or you're handed a situation or somebody else makes the decision. And, I think it's really tough on everybody involved because there isn't that innate sort of, hey, I hired you because I think you're great. You have to say that, but like, it's not always truly the case. And so it's different. It's harder. And, like an example would be like, I didn't hire Christopher Priest on Deathstroke. We ended up having a wonderful relationship, but it was touch and go at first because I think part of that is because it was like he was unsure that I really wanted him to be there, and I really did like what he was doing, but I was also, it was a stressful situation because it was Rebirth and everyone was questioning everything, and so, but not having that initial sort of like, hey, I'm reaching out to you because I dig what you do. And I want you to do that with me on this thing. I think that's really important. And I think it was something, I think it's something maybe that's not talked about because it's so obviously like the way that it should be. But when you're working for a really big company, sometimes those decisions aren't made by you. And so I think it makes the whole process more challenging. But at Skybound, I've hired, everybody that I worked with, I hired, and it's, when the process of making Clementine, as an example, with Tilly Walden, like, there's a lot of back and forth, but like, she knows that I trust her and believe in her and she believes in me. And it's like, it's been like a wonderful creative process of getting these books done because there is that sort of trust and belief. And like, we're all in this together. And at the end of the day, like, I know she's going to kill it. And, there may be things that need to get changed, and that's totally fine. And she gets it. And, so finding those partnerships with talent, writers, artists, colorists, letterers, everybody that knows, like, hey, we're all in this together. I believe in what you do. Nobody's perfect. Nobody's going to do everything perfectly all the time. And that's completely okay, including myself. And so, being able to say, hey, let's fix this thing, but like, you're the person for the job. So don't doubt that. Like, you've got this. I believe in you. You've got this. This needs to get tweaked, but that doesn't mean that I don't believe in you. I think that's a big. I don't even know what the question was at this point. But I think that maybe answered it. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, one thing I would like sort of focus in on with going to Skybound as a senior editor.
Yeah.
Because what was like, I want to sort of leave the DC stuff behind and really focus on what you're doing right now. Is just, what were you relieved to be able to find yourself in this position? Were you able to, because now you're dealing with creators, you said creator owned, but it sounds like some of the Skybound Comet is also connected to the Walking Dead universe.
Sure. Yeah. It's not all necessarily creator owned. Like as an example, Tilly Walden's Clementine is in the Walking Dead universe, so it's a Walking Dead book.
Yeah.
Robert obviously is a stakeholder in the Walking Dead, so Robert had to weigh in on things. But yeah, I mean, just generally speaking, at Skybound, we are we really consider ourselves to be a creator first company, which is really great. I guess go ahead.
More of what a comic book editor actually is, sort of like being somebody who's a friend in a way. Yeah. Did that become more of it? I mean, because now you're shepherding a creator-owned book sometimes, and other times you're working with, books that you guys own. But let's just focus on the creator-owned stuff. Mm-hmm. Is that sort of your interaction? What really did anything change, or was it? Yeah. Or was there sort of some pressure relieved that now you're more of a partner instead of somebody overseeing and shepherding a shared universe and going, no, you can't do that because that guy's showing up in 3 months and whatever. Did you feel like the pressure was off a bit to be even more creative and more interactive with the creators of these series? Let's just focus on the creator owned.
Yeah. That's such an interesting question. Like, basically, what's the difference between editing a DC comic and a creator-owned comic,
an image book? Yeah.
They're different. I wouldn't say the pressure was off in any specific way. I would say it was just, the problems that you have on one are sort of replaced by different problems on another. It's definitely, it's totally different. And it comes down to, I think, relationships become more important in the creator-owned space because there's more competition. There's only one place you can go to write a Batman comic. There's a gazillion publishers at this point that you can go to do your own thing. And so definitely relationships become more important. But then once you're working on something, the editing process is similar in that, it's still a comic book at the end of the day, and you're going to make, give feedback on the same thing. But yeah, you're definitely thinking about things like, I guess, it is similar in a lot of ways in that you're thinking about, how do I get noticed? How do I break out? How do I communicate what this book is? How do I make sure that the creator is delivering on what they set out to do? That is something I did at DC, but maybe it becomes more of a focus at, doing original things. Is the beginning of my sort of editing style with any creator-driven, creator-owned book is, what are you trying to do with this? what's your goal? What do you
sell books? But
other than that, I think that's Skybound's goal is certainly to sell books and do that's the business goal. But from a creator standpoint, what do you want to say? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Why are you doing this book? What excites you about this book? What were some of the touchstones as far as tone and character and things that you're drawing from for this project? So being familiar with, I think you have to have a broader skills, knowledge base and doing sort of original things, because superhero comics are such a specific thing versus you could do any genre, in the original space. So, having those sort of broad touchstones and being able to sort of draw out, why are you telling this story? I like the story, starting with that. You have to start with a good idea that you like and good execution from the jump. But what's important to you? And then my job is basically to keep that in mind as things progress. And if things feel like they're getting away from what the goal was at the beginning, to say, hey, just a heads up, I feel like we're getting away from this isn't pointing to this theme or this lesson or this whatever. Do we like this decision? And very much being a part of the team, and also kind of letting, if there's a disagreement, within reason, the tie goes to the creator. It's your book, man. Whatever you want to do, I support it. But I'm bringing this up because I see that there might be a way to do this better, or this might be a problem, or I don't understand this. Really, it's a lot of asking questions and making sure that I know what they're trying to do, and sometimes they don't know what they're trying to do, and that's okay. It's just part of the process of creating and refining something. But yeah, it's definitely all these things were the same at DC. It's just I would say there's more focus in that, like, we knew at the end of the day we needed a very specific thing, versus it's really more individualized
Mhm.
to the creator and what they're trying to achieve versus what the company is trying to achieve.
Now, with the breakdown with Skybound, you have Skybound, and then which is an imprint at Image, if that's correct.
Yep.
So, is there an agreement just to create our own book? Is there an agreement with Skybound of keeping a certain approach to a series? And is this all worked out up front, where you're on a Skybound book and that means this, and that means the series must maintain sort of this approach? Or and going back to what you're talking about, what are we doing this? What is the agenda on this book? What's your tone, theme? Do you have to, as the senior editor overseeing editors and probably associate editors, you have to keep that sort of straight, what the company wants in a way?
Yeah, it's I would say all of that should be worked out at the beginning for the most part. Like, if we greenlight a book, it's because we feel like this book fits within the Skybound portfolio, within what we do. We're very elevated genre, things that could feel like they sit next to Walking Dead, Invincible. Those kinds of books are the kinds of books that we want to do. Generally speaking, that's it's elevated genre. Books that have big stakes, books that have lots of twists and turns, books that have like a very human sort of core.
Yeah, there's
it is
thinking about like there's a really big human aspect of being thrust into this weird situation, this really heightened element. When I think of some of them,
that's the key.
So you've already, the creators should know this when they're pitching to you that, my project would be appropriate for a Skybound, tag to it. Then you're also, okay, we are all in agreement on what we're setting out to do. So that's where, is that you're coming into that, or where's the rest of your team too involved in that aspect? Or when do you hand it over to them?
So Skybound's a pretty small editorial staff. Like, I actually don't have an assistant editor. I'm just doing things myself. But
what is the breakdown? Is it a senior editor?
So there's editor in chief Sean Matthews, who's wonderful. Everybody's wonderful. It's Skybound, honestly. So he's editor in chief, sort of in charge of everything that we do. Senior editor is me. And then we've got two editors, Amanda LaFranco and John Moisen. John's been with the company for 5 or 6 years, and Amanda's been with the company for about a year. And that's the editorial staff. And so we kind of all have our own things that we do, but what's good about Skybound is it's very collaborative. And so, like, on Clementine or on in these graphic novels that we've done, we do send it around to people for notes and thoughts. But at the end of the day, like, the editor is the one in charge. And so the editor is responsible for delivering the notes, but also deciding what works and what doesn't work. But all 3 of those people that I mentioned are super sharp and talented, and definitely add a lot to the mix. So it's really a team. There's no book that, even though there's only one editor maybe listed on the book, no book is necessarily edited by only one person. It's just they are sort of the final call. But we're definitely we like to help each other out as much as possible. But yeah, going back to sort of the acquisitions process, that's part of it, is like, does this feel like a Skybound book or not? And there's lots of great books out there that I turned down because I was like, this just doesn't feel like something that we do. And I read all kinds of different things. And, so like with our young readers line, one of the lines that we drew was like, we're not doing any memoirs. We're not doing anything like a lot of other companies, especially in the book market, like, they want to do memoirs. They want to do sort of personal stories about, coming of age stories about, the author as a child or the author going through a specific thing or whatever. And those books can sell really, really well. Smile, obviously, being the prime example of that. But it doesn't feel like a Skybound book. And there's lots of other companies that do that really well. So we're just going to do what we do well, which is like big, fun, wild comics that have that human core. So.
And when did you, to talk a bit about Skybound Comet which is launching, in a couple of months, really, with Clementine.
Yep.
I remember.
June 22nd is the direct market date for Clementine.
Did you sit down and really look over what makes we've already talked about what makes a Skybound book, but did you go, what can we add to this? How can we reshape it? Was it an opportunity for you guys to maybe inject something else and other elements, especially when you're doing, YA and middle grade books with that launch?
I think the philosophy was, we know what we do. We have a clear vision of kind of an identity as a brand, as a company, of what kinds of books that we do, but we want to do those books for a younger audience. And we saw that there seemed to be a gap in the market for genre kids books, especially graphic novels, middle grade YA graphic novels, and that it felt like, hey, well, we know how to do this thing well. Maybe we could do this thing well. So that's where we're at. We're trying. We've learned a lot. It's actually completely going back to the business side of things. It is a different business, breaking into sort of the book market. Schools and libraries are way more important. Parents, educators, like one of the great conversations I had early on when I started Skybound was with a longtime book agent named Judy Hansen, who you should get on this podcast because they're really great. I think they've got editorial experience, but Judy's represents all of the big sort of names in YA and middle grade. And the first thing she said was, "You're not actually selling books to kids. You're selling books to gatekeepers, to the gatekeepers of said kids. So whether those gatekeepers are school librarians, their parents, older brother, uncle who's going to buy the books for them, they're not buying the books themselves at the end of the day," which I thought was really interesting, because it's kind of like those, to make a direct market comparison, like they're the retailers almost. They're the people that you need, or they're the speculators. They're the people that sort of make noise and get excited about things, and it also trickles out from there, or trickles down. It's been an interesting process. I think we've done a really great job, and not without its challenges, of course, but I could not be more proud of where we're at with Skybound Comet right now. I think the first 3 books are really good. I can't take credit for 2 of the 3 of them, really, because they were in progress before I started, but I genuinely think they're all great. And I also think we've done a really good job of planning and not biting off too much, really keeping our line focused, really treating each book as its own thing and giving it enough time, not only from a creative standpoint to get to a good place, but also from a marketing standpoint, making sure that everything feels like we're putting something behind it. And using something like Clementine and The Walking Dead and Tilly Walden to elevate everything. That was another great sort of lesson I learned, was when starting a line, like you kind of need a tentpole thing or a creator or whoever. And I think with Tilly and Clementine and Walking Dead, we kind of have all of that in one thing. So it's great. And one of the reasons I took this job was because I wanted to build something and help build something. And I have felt sort of valued and a part of that process, and felt like my decisions mattered, and felt like it was really, but also I was on a great team, and I've always been a team guy. Going back to sports again, like I've always been a team guy. And so it's been really great. And I feel like we've set ourselves up for success as much as we possibly can. We've already got orders in for some of the books in the launch, and they're doing well. So that's wonderful. Start reviews, all that stuff. It's all happening. So it's really, really exciting.
Is there anything that you're taking from your early days watching Ben Abernathy and Mark Chiarello do their jobs, is there anything you're using that you picked up from them that you're using now to get this line going? Is there one or two things that you're like, these are good habits to have as an editor that now you're using today as a senior editor?
It's a very good question. I'm trying. I can think of. I think I'm definitely a product of all of this experience, and so anything that I'm doing, like I almost can't point to one thing because it's all cumulative. and anything like the editor I am is because of all those people that I work with, all of the mistakes I've made, all of the successes I've had. It's all sort of in this soup that is Alex Antone at this point. So it's hard for me to distinguish, but I mean, I was, as an example, there's one thing that I learned from Andy Kubert, who was he would go over a lot of the covers at DC and having conversation, just talking about influences and people teaching you things and just being open to learning at all points. Like I probably learned more sitting in Andy Kubert's office talking about covers than I learned in 8 years at DC, just because he's so good at it and knows how to break down an idea and deliver something that's exciting and visually striking and clear. So like in coming up with the Clementine cover, I was definitely using directly the same lessons and principles that I learned from Andy sitting and talking to in his office about Aquaman covers. So no one would ever know that, but because the execution obviously is totally different, because Andy Kubert or Robson Roca is going to be a completely different person than Tilly Walden as far as art goes. But a dramatic upshot always works. And so that was, I remember explaining that to Tilly and crediting Andy for sort of instilling that in me over the years and I remember going to him and it almost became a joke where I was like, this cover isn't quite working. What's wrong? And Andy would just, change the camera angle and suddenly it would work. And it was like, okay, yeah, upshot. I'm just going to remember that. Let's remember upshot.
Anything else happening with the Skybound Comet? I mean, that seems to be the next big thing of what's going on. Do you have? I guess you're going to see how the 3 books go first, but
I mean, we've got a long-term plan. We've got more books. We're actually about to announce some books in like 3 weeks, which I'm really excited about. I think what's been interesting about Skybound Comet and just my time at Skybound in general is learning about the industry. It's been an interesting 2 years. Obviously, I started right before the pandemic started, so it feels like the industry is a different industry than it was in January of 2020. But seeing things like successful web comics that then become really, really, really successful graphic novels. Thinking about how to build your audience, one of the things I've learned how to do at Skybound is Kickstarter.
Oh, really?
I've done a Kickstarter before. And we acquired a book called Ava's Demon, which is a really popular webcomic, and we ran a Kickstarter for her. And again, going back to the skills of an editor and problem solving, all of that, they basically told me, Alex, figure out Kickstarter and launch a book via Kickstarter.
Yeah, that's a really easy. Let me get back to you tomorrow with that.
I did so much research. I talked to so many people, and again, it's just asking questions and problem solving and going like, what do I need to know? And finding a problem and being surrounded by really great people who are willing to help you and give you their time and their expertise. And at Skybound, we had a really good tabletop team because at Skybound we do everything. Audio, TV, tabletop, video games, everything. And so our tabletop team was very experienced at Kickstarter, and talking to them and saying like, okay, what's an add-on versus what's a stretch goal versus what's a tier? Like, what's the philosophy behind any number of decisions that need to get made? And there's like 1,000 when it comes to a Kickstarter. It really is like setting up a small business, but being able to ask those questions and get that figured out, and then launch the Kickstarter eventually, and being given the time to do it. I remember we had to delay it at one point because I didn't feel like we were ready. and it was all received very well because it was very much like, well, we only get one chance to make it, first impression, and we want to do it right, so let's delay it a month or whatever. And when it came out, we ended up at the time, Ava's Demon, when we launched it, by the end we were the top web comic of all time on Kickstarter. So it was a huge success, which has now basically become a part of my job, is to continue to do more things like that. But just going back to kind of overall how the book business functions, how publishing functions, like thinking about how to find an audience, how to build an audience, how to like make sure you give the really hardcore fans something that's really important. You don't necessarily need a million fans of something. You need a couple thousand who are really passionate about it, and you can have a really great business. And then hopefully with something like a web comic that you acquire, you can put it out in the book market. Hopefully it finds a new audience, like Nimona being a great example of that web comic, or even Tilly Walden's On a Sunbeam was a web comic first, and now it's a huge seller. So really figuring out like what the best way is to approach each book is kind of the future of comics, and the future of what I'm doing at Skybound is taking that sort of individualized approach to creators, but also taking that individualized approach to the project and the book, and on the business side as well, figuring out, well, what if we launched this book as a web comic first, or what if we did this as a periodical first? This seems like something that the direct market would like. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to make $1 zillion in the direct market, but it seems like we could do that, build an audience for it, and then maybe it'll be a successful middle grade book or YA book after that. In the book market where the sales ceiling is so high. Strategy, I guess, is the future, and figuring out, just continually making these decisions and trying to do right by the creators that we work with, because we definitely view all the creators that we work with as partners, and we're in it together. And so figuring out how best to do right by them and by the books, and also the company. Obviously, the company, we need to continue to function as a business and make money, and it's a lot. It's a lot of decisions, and it's fun. And going back to that graphic, like I like being able to do all those different things and not having to focus on just one or two. I like the broadness of the job. I like the fact that 1 minute I could be deep in an Excel spreadsheet, and the next minute I could be talking, to somebody about a very specific thing in the story, and the next I could be looking at art. The next I could be talking to the PR and marketing teams about kind of what the philosophy is for this or that, or going on a book tour, talking to librarians about the book. It's a lot. It's really fun. It's a fun job, and I'm interested in, because I'm guessing since you've been doing this podcast, you've talked to a lot of different editors, and I feel like if you ask them kind of what an editor was, they'd all have a kind of a different answer or they would have a one or two things that they were more focused on than others. Yeah. I think that's really a special, unique thing, because I don't know, maybe there's other jobs that are the same, but it seems like every editor is going to have their own style. Like, I feel like you're not going to talk to two editors that are exactly the same or have the same philosophy or approach, which I just think is interesting.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, that was one of the reasons why I started the podcast, because I was always wondering, was I doing my job right? Because I just sort of got thrown into it, and then I'm dealing with A-list talent, and I'm going, am I making a fool of myself? And talking to my bosses going, what the hell is this guy doing? Or am I doing it right? And there really is no one answer for any editor. It really is, as you said, a cumulative thing of experiences and ability, of learning stuff. And there's crossover, there's approaches. And I think one thing is communication. If you're going to be an editor, you can't be scared of communicating with people in the whole spectrum of it's not going to be all happy, joy. You're going to have to deliver bad news, but how you do that can, help everybody involved in it in a way, instead of just destroy careers or people feeling like crap. So it is communication. Yeah. But it's, now I've been doing the podcast for a while. You are beginning to see of like, yeah, there is no real answer of what makes an editor, but there's a lot of similar answers, I guess. In a way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. At the end of the day, we're all putting out comics, and there is a function to the form. Yes. And so, yeah, but like, we're, all of the different editors that I've had all have different origin stories and different experiences and how they came to comics and things that they like about comics and comics that they want to make. And it's, I think I'm constantly learning from the talent. I'm constantly learning from other editors, and it's cool. I think there's nobody. I guess what I'm saying is you're never going to have somebody come on this podcast and go, all right, I figured it out.
Yeah, no, that's not going to happen. Still hasn't happened.
I know everything.
Well, then maybe that'll be my last time I do my podcast. So that'll be it.
That could be your thesis, where you're like, all right, I've determined what makes the perfect editor, and you can synthesize them in a lab, and then you can license it to Marvel and DC.
My work's done here. I'm just going to patent it and then make millions. So now, seeing you're a first-time guest, and I haven't done this in a long time, and I'm going to let you go, but I got the lightning round, which is something I've moved away from because I've been bringing back people. But the lightning round is for first-time guests, and it's basically...
I should have listened to the lightning round on some of the other podcasts to know what the questions were. Okay, let's
they change a bit. It's 1.4 questions, just to sort of put a nice little bookend to the whole conversation we had. So whatever comes to mind, just quick answers, and I'll let you get to enjoy the rest of your Sunday. So what creator, living or dead, would you like to edit or wish you had the chance to edit?
Brian K. Vaughan is my favorite writer, and I don't even know what I'd have to say to him because I think he's so great, but I would love to work with him because I'm sure I would learn a ton. He's one of the reasons I got into comics, reading, Ex Machina, Why the Last Man, Runaways, so yeah, just being in proximity to BKV would be pretty cool. Yeah, that's my answer.
Okay. What comic are you reading that you have read recently that just wowed you?
I just recently read the first issue of Shadow War, which is the DC event with like Deathstroke, Batman, and Robin, and I feel like I'm pitching a corporate event here, but it is a great event, and it's really like as someone who's done a bunch of crossovers and knowing that like, oh my God, how crazy was this to pull all together? I guess the difference in this case, it's the same writer of all the books, but that first issue of Shadow War felt like a big, fun summer, I guess late spring, early summer event should feel. Yeah, it's good stuff.
While you're working, what do you prefer to have on? Music, audio, a radio, podcast, or just TV, or just silence?
Depends on what I'm working on. If I'm working on a spreadsheet, then I need music to entertain my brain and keep me going. If I'm reading something, I need absolute silence because I can't focus. I need the space for my brain to work, and so if I'm reading, it needs to be really silent, which has been a challenge at times, especially in the pandemic.
True. What's your favorite comic book convention and why?
Oh God! So traditionally, I would have said Emerald City Comic Con because
that's a popular
one.
Like
so many creators go to that, and it's like not too big, and it really feels comic centric. And there's a good bar close by. But honestly, I went to PLA recently, and as far as like the actual convention of it goes, PLA was so much fun because it's librarians, and librarians the difference is at Comic-Con, and to a lesser degree, but when you go to Comic-Con, like you get people to come up to your booth and are like, oh, they still make comics. Like, that's so cool. What are you doing? Oh, okay, where do I get my free thing? So it's at PLA, at the very base level, you have people that are interested in reading because they're all librarians, and they're also there for business. So they have a real purpose to coming up and talking to you. You're actually pitching the books and giving them, you're still giving them free stuff, of course, because that's any convention. But I love the level of enthusiasm I got from librarians that really seem to care about the material and also wanting to engage with the publisher. And yeah, it was really neat.
Oh, cool. Well, hey, Alex, that's it. Thank you very much.
We did it. Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate being able to talk about this very, very specific thing that I'm not sure that many people are interested in or know about. So I appreciate the opportunity. And as a listener of many podcasts, this was fun.
Thank you. It was fun here.
Be on one.
It's awesome. Right. Thank you for all the great answers.